Thank you for joining me on the Private Investigator Experience podcast. Happy New Year! We have a lot to be thankful for from 2025, and I'm getting ready to celebrate 104 years of West Coast Detectives International, up to 1922. And we're excited about that as we continue on that journey serving our clients worldwide. On this podcast, I'm your host, Phil Little. On this channel, we talk about the cases and life of a PI and look at events nationally and globally that may affect us in our communities. As I solve cases and look at the global security issues, I use my military, law enforcement, intelligence service, and global security experience with a touch of my biblical worldview to develop solutions for our clients. Before I get into today's year-end, year-beginning post, would you help me by liking, sharing, subscribing? You know the drill. Hit that notification bell for future posts. In my investigative work, I usually am focusing on enforcement when a client comes to us with a problem to try to develop what happened and if prosecution is warranted or recovery. But along the same time, I am looking for preventive systems to address issues before they might reoccur for this client in the future. And we always recommend when we get through with an assignment, preventing things that they can do to keep from calling us back in a year or two with the same problem. Looking ahead to 2026, I'm going to make a statement you might think sounds rather weird, but I would say we're closer to the end of this age than when we started January 1, 2025. You might say, Phil, that is really insightful. You're really a smart person. Or you might say, it doesn't take a very smart person to come up to that conclusion. It's a year later. We're a year closer to whatever the end may be or whenever it may be. But if we reflect on the events of 2025, we can see where there might be some facts that account for more than just 365 days closer to the end of this age. Some of the things I will be sharing you've heard from me before, but I remember my early days growing up in a one-room schoolhouse, a farm in Missouri, and I could tell you some stories about winters getting to school in that mile and a half from our house. And I won't go into that on this post. But I heard from school that you needed to hear something 7 times to get into your memory. And I've not gotten to 7 yet, but I've maybe 3 or 4 of what I'm sharing today, some of the things I'm sharing. I've been watching current events, many of which were violent over the last few years. And that has led me to do more of a deep dive investigation into what they mean and how they relate to the end times. Some might ask, will there ever be an end time? Or will this planet just continue on and people coming and going and it's just going to go forever that way? Well, I think there's a different explanation than that. But first, let's look at some physical issues that point to the fact that we might be living in a time which is different than any other in relation to spiritual issues, which we can validate from the Bible, which is proven to be true. I won't get into that today, but you can do research and find out. Even great scientists are coming to the conclusion in their studies that, yes, the Bible is true and things have happened like it's portrayed. But let's look at the physical events, which point to a deteriorating planet as they eat away at the foundation of our Earth. Have we seen these events escalate in the last 50 years? Let's do just a short look to see. In looking at worldwide disasters, now this was major disasters, you can find from 1970 to 1979, there was 711 worldwide. Now we can jump ahead a few years to say 2000 to 2009. There were 3,536 worldwide. So that's a pretty substantial growth during that time frame. And there was a cost of over 1.38 trillion up to 2010 from these losses. And it's grown substantially since then. And the cost for the first half of 2025 has been over 131 billion. Now, From 1970 to 2025, there's been over 144,000 documented disasters of all type. That's even small, like 3.0 earthquakes, fires, floods, hurricanes, typhoons, whatever, all those various events. There's been an explosion of events over the last few years. Now, we could spend a lot more time looking at that, but I think you get the picture. What can we connect this growth to? Well, I think there are two factors. The first is physical. The advancement of our society since the time of Adam and Eve has led gigantic growth of things that have deteriorated the air and ground. The growth to billions of people living off the earth and with many countries not honoring environmental protections, basic things. We're not talking about global warming or anything like that, and the myths that surround that, but we're just talking about countries like China, for one, and others in the world that are flooding their atmosphere with chemicals from smoke and debris and other things. There are some places in the world, the air quality is so bad that people have difficulty just breathing. I've been in some of those places. Fortunately, I didn't have to stay that long, but they result in illness and premature death to people living there. Now, there are spiritual issues. Whether we want to believe it or not, God created the earth and he set rules for his creation to follow. Now, I suggest that you do research if you don't believe that there's a God or he created the earth. A good book to follow. Lee Strobel was a atheist journalist that set out to disprove that there was a God and anything to this the God phenomena. And he found that it was true. And he's got a book, A Case for Christ, that you can search out, Lee Strobel, and you do some research. When God created Earth, he set rules for his creation to follow. When they violated it, he responded. Yes, God is love, but he's also a God of mercy and justice and righteousness and holiness. The first time he acted was in Genesis 6, 5 through 8. That's a story of Noah who had found favor with God. Now, even though you might not know much anything about God or gone to church in your life, you know about Noah. There's been movies made about the big ark. It was a pretty big boat built in the middle of nowhere at that time. But so why did that boat come about? From Genesis 6, 5 through 8. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe away from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, birds, and the creatures that move above the ground. For I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And we know from that flood that came on the earth, Noah and his family went in, and they took two of every kind of animal at that time, and they survived and went on to re-inhabit the earth after that flood. Now you might, well, this is really harsh. Why would a God of love do that? Well, God created the world, and He's God. We aren't. We can't have any imagine about His majesty and really who He is around with our human minds. But this is the earth He created, and when He created man, He gave us rules to live by. His rules were to protect us, not to harm us. And because he didn't want robots, he already had angels, he gave man and woman free will. And then let the fun begin. But with this free will, if we don't choose to accept him, and we decide to act with evil thoughts and actions, there's going to be a penalty. Excuse me. Now, those evil thoughts and actions are the kind that plunder, kill, murder, and run havoc on a country, worship foreign gods, go off the deep end. We're not talking about this people saying, I don't believe in God. If they fine, they can do that. God allows them to do that as long as they don't try to harm other people. If they go ahead and live their life and they want to live it for the devil, and God will say, okay, go your own way. But at some point, if it gets so evil, as there are times in the Bible that had happened, then he acts. And this was the first time in Genesis 6. And along the road, he has dealt with other cities who became so evil that it couldn't allow to go on. Now, how can we relate the time of Noah to today? God's been very transparent with his people, giving them insight about things to come, not all the details or exact timing. Now, I've talked about the close to 2,500 prophecies in the Bible. Somewhat over 2,000 of those were already fulfilled. And there was one key prophecy that was fulfilled in 1948 that, excuse me, makes the time we live in completely different. Excuse me here. The New Year's throat problem. Now, why is that different from the times in history that the people living in that time thought it was the world coming to the world because things were so bad? But this one prophecy about the rebirth of the nation of Israel, with the Jews returning from all over the world, that happened in 1948, had to happen before there could be a countdown to the end of the age. Now, this prophecy was in several places in the Old Testament, which shows God wants us to understand what would happen. And he just didn't say it once or twice. He said it more than 7 times. Now, here's a couple of places. Ezekiel 11:17. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will gather you from the nations. Now he's talking about the Jewish people, the nation of Israel, and bring them back from the countries where you have been scattered, and I will give them back to the land of Israel again. Now, if you've been one of those that have believed misinformation about the Jews not being in Israel before 1948 or those recent times, here are the facts. King David, a king of Israel, and you've probably maybe heard of him. There's been some movies made, and he's well known, particularly in the Christian and Jewish world. In 1500 years before the time of Christ, he was king in Jerusalem, and he made Jerusalem the capital city of Israel. That was 1500 years before the first century, and about 2000 years before Islam was even born. There's another one, Isaiah 11:11 and 12. In that day, the Lord will reach out his hand a second time to reclaim the surviving remnant of his people from Assyria, from Lower Egypt, from Upper Egypt, from Cush, from Elam, from Babylon and Hamath, and from the islands of the Mediterranean and all over the world. He will raise a banner for the nations and gather the exiles of Israel. He will assemble the scattered people of Judah from the four quarters of the earth. Now, this happening sets the stages for additional prophecies which relate to the end time. That had to happen before there's a countdown to the end of the age. You can research that out if you like from the book of Revelations and in the Bible throughout it. What then leads me, and many others, a lot smarter than I am, to think that we're living in the last days of the church age. Now, just a little point the church age started when Jesus went back to heaven when he was on earth 2,000 years ago. And we're still living in the church age. And it will remain until the church is taken out, raptured out by God, which it talks about in several places in the Bible. Now, I will say again, no one knows when Jesus will return. None of us know. But we can study the signs that have been left to get some understanding of what will be happening before that event. The physical prophecies I laid out at the beginning are part of the sign that God has left, and these will be increasing as we near the end of the age. Now, think about that. What about wars just in your lifetime? Say, last 10, 20 years, wars have proliferated and just exploded all over the world. What about earthquakes? Check out the earthquakes and see how they have progressed over the last few years. There's disasters everywhere. They're expanding rapidly, and there's a walking away from God in an attempt to wipe God out of the face of countries such as in the UN and others. Now, Matthew 24, 4 through 8, Jesus was talking to his disciples, and he tells them this. 24, Matthew 24, verse 4. Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Messiah, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Yeah. But see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation. Think about that. Kingdom against kingdom. There'll be famines. Think about that. All over the world. We here in America are oblivious to that. But check it out. Earthquakes in various places. That's happening. All these are the beginning of birth pains. Now, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, there's a lot of things that talk about the agricultural situation, which they tell prophecies and stories because that was all it was at that time. The industry was that. Then a lot of things are portrayed the birth of children. Now, if you talk to a woman, you know that the birth pains start pretty mild. But as they get closer, sometimes it's a day or two or three, but hopefully it's not that long, according to talking to women. And they get really bad. And right before that baby is born, they're really intense. Now, these warnings aren't to scare us, but to alert us of how we should be living and acting. Matthew 24:36 through 39 says, and it's with some insight, we can relate to the time we're living in. Now, like I said, in Matthew 24:36, but about the day and hour, no one knows. Oh, excuse me, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. This is how it's going to be at the coming of the Son of Man. Now, this ark, which was massive, it was 400 or 500 feet long, three decks, big, being built. It took 120 years for Noah to build this ark. People were around making fun of him. They all knew. And he tried to tell them, guys, get ready. There's trouble coming. There's going to be judgment coming. They laughed at him. They just kept living their own lives, worshiping idols, other gods, living life, having fun, getting just going on without God. And what about now? What about the situations that are going on in our lives? Because it wasn't that the people of this time of Noah were so grossly evil. They were just ignoring God and living their own lives in corrupt, evil ways. Now, they weren't thinking about tomorrow. They weren't thinking about God really bringing judgment. Well, when I look at the events in 2025, I see many of those things today. People caught up in pleasure, doing what makes them feel good, ignoring all the needs around them, focusing on how they can get ahead. God has given us warnings that apply to us today as they did in the days of Noah. But we have chosen as a country to promote evil as good, wrong as right, allowing our children to be sacrificed on the altar of transgender confusion, and promoting and electing politicians who want to control their people by promising free things to get their vote. As we have elected a government who is attempting to bring back constitutional government and equal justice for all, we see the forces of evil progressive ideas grow with a violent fury to throw the country into turmoil. We're going to see this escalate in 2026 as we approach the midterms. The question is, will enough of us who believe in freedom for all people stand up, push back by electing officials who support our constitutional freedoms? Will you step out of the crowd and investigate for yourself what the Bible says and what is going on in our society? Then let your voice be heard. Don't be deceived and become part of the solution in keeping our country free. Become part of the solution in keeping our country free. I welcome your comments on any of the platforms, or you can email me at pi777 at gmail.com. Now, again, would you help me by liking, sharing, and subscribing? And you know the drill, hit the notification bell. And if you happen to have a situation in your family or company that you want to put a PI, help me, well, send me a summary of that. I'll let you know how it might work and if possible. to p little pi 777 at gmail.com. Thank you. May God bless you, your family, and may God bless America. Happy blessed New Year to you.